Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual panel, Innovation and Integrity. I'm David Natchez, the Executive Director of the FinTech and Sports Wagering Innovation Center here in New Jersey, Jersey City, New Jersey. This panel is part of our Gamble4Good series. Gamble4Good is a program of the Innovation Center that looks at all of the factors that go into how the public perceives the gambling industry and how it's perceived in the public realm. So that includes things like responsible gambling, includes compliance, ESG, DEI, other concepts, and it also includes integrity. So we put all of these concepts under our Gamble4Good umbrella and are launching programs to deal with all of these issues to help the industry to improve in these areas and also to help the industry tell its story, the regulated industry tell its story about how it's working to make gambling safe, for everyone, inclusive, and better for communities. So that's the program we're going to be doing today. We have 4 great panelists joining us today, very experienced and learned group here, so I expect an excellent discussion. And I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So we're going to start with David Rebuck from New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement.
Thanks, Dave. And it's really a privilege to be here to talk about this critically important topic of integrity and particularly sports wagering. For those who are not familiar with me, I am the Director of the Division of Gaming Enforcement in the state of New Jersey. I've been in this capacity since 2011. And of course, everybody knows, if you know anything about regulation of gambling in the United States, the core element of why it's regulated and why it can be operational and effectively regulated is the topic of integrity. And so today, with our discussion on sports wagering, which essentially has been in play in New Jersey since 2018, I really look forward to talking with all the other panelists on this topic and hopefully educating everybody on our perspectives of in supporting this important initiative through the Innovation Center. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. You probably don't need an introduction, so but thanks for giving one anyways. Let's go to Chris.
I was going to make the same suggestion. That's I'm Chris Adams, the founder and CEO of SharpRank. We are an independent evaluator in sports betting, where content, media, and sports books merge, which we'll get into today. But my background is in investment banking and auditing, and then investment banking again. And so a large part of what we do is a large part of what the Innovation Center's core concept is, which is taking solutions from financial markets, FinTech solutions, and applying them where there is an identical infrastructure. So really looking forward to this. It's going to be a great panel. There's some very, very smart people on here. So very excited to chat that through with everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to have you. All right, Leo.
Yeah, hey everyone, happy to be here. My name is Leo Villalobos. I'm a counsel at MLB. I've been here about 2.5 years. Before that, I was an attorney at a big law firm here in New York City doing antitrust litigation. My official title here at MLB is a counsel on sports betting and compliance. So as the title would suggest, I spend a lot of time on sports betting issues. And as relevant for this panel, I help oversee the league's integrity efforts with respect to sports betting. So that includes kind of shaping the substantive policy, although the policies that apply to players are now collectively bargained, overseeing our education efforts for all personnel, overseeing our relationships with third parties like U.S. Integrity that help us with the enforcement and monitoring of sports betting, and assisting with any investigations related to sports betting. I also handle some government affairs, so kind of like being the point of contact for regulators and legislators on these issues. And I help our business development team with any deals related to sports betting and help them navigate kind of like the regulatory implications of of those deals. So yeah, happy to be here.
I'm Sebastian Jedrzejewski. I'm Director of Regulatory Affairs at US Integrity. We're an integrity monitor that has operators, leagues, and regulators all hooked into the integrity space, sharing information and ensuring that sports remains clean and that regulatory obligations and policy obligations are met. And that's really where my role sits in terms of maintaining contacts with regulators, as well as people like Leo and sports books as well, and ensuring that they're meeting their compliance obligations and ensuring that everybody's kind of driving towards the same and similar goal, just as the Innovation Center has, of maintaining integrity and gambling for good, let's say. I will tee us up a little bit with some background on what integrity monitoring is, how we detect issues in sports wagering, and some of the innovations and challenges in the space, and then I'll hand it back over to David. So bear with me as I speak through some things that maybe some of you know, but maybe some of you don't know, and I'll talk it through. So when we talk about detecting potential integrity issues, especially from the sports wagering side, we're really relying on three things. And that is, one, the integrity monitoring, so the ability to maintain eyes on wagers and potential illicit activity. And then the information sharing and of suspicious betting and the controls that regulators and sports books and leagues all have in place. When it comes to integrity monitoring right now, the biggest dependency for effectiveness of these measures really is the underlying policies that everyone puts in place, whether it be an operator's controls, a league like MLB's own policies, or a regulator's like David's policies for integrity monitoring and maintaining an integrity monitor. And so you can have policies that exist that enforce and ensure that sports books have controls to detect suspicious wagering. You can have that, and on top of that, require a relationship with an integrity monitor such as ourselves to share that information with other sports books and leagues and ensure that there's a proper flow of information so that everybody's informed, which is really essential. But the policies really rely on the effectiveness and the attention paid by those who enforce them to ensure that the compliance is happening at all times, and as well as the effective and an annual and normal review of those policies to ensure that they're all meeting the goals. We're going to talk about innovation today, and the space has really, really evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. And I like to talk about the difference in integrity monitoring and the different providers and the way that things go about. From my experience over at the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, from the perspective of a 1.0 versus 2.0 approach to integrity. From a 1.0 approach to integrity, we're talking about a baseline information sharing hub where a sports book detects something through their controls and reports it to that information hub, and then disseminates that information out to all the other books and leagues and individuals within their network to ensure that they are able to take a second look at their own information and then report that back to the information hub, who would report it to a regulator or report it to a league or both. When we talk about 2.0, we're really talking about innovations in technology over the last 10 to 15 years and how we're leveraging that in the space, alongside the proliferation of sports betting regulatory regimes and the updates to some previously existing regimes. And so at US Integrity, we've got this 360 view, which really embraces this innovative 2.0 approach that I like to call it, through our relationships with sports entities, through our relationships with regulators who we hold monthly calls with to ensure that everybody's kind of on the same page, and operators, which have all been aided by that proliferation of sports betting regimes. On top of that, we've got secure and anonymized wager data coming through that helps us to ensure that operators and regulators are all getting the most fulsome review of the information that comes through. The biggest challenge for me, and this maybe sets up a little bit of a conversation, speaking as Director of Regulatory Affairs, is really to do with the alignment of those regulatory regimes. In the States and in Canada, we're talking about a state-by-state model, but globally, it's going to always be a state-by-state model. And wagering is a global activity, and sports is a global activity. An event can happen in New Jersey, but will be impacted by wagers in the Philippines, for example. And so ensuring that everybody's regulatory regimes, ensuring that all the books, all the leagues are hooked into the right conversations, the right information sharing agreements, really is essential to making this process work. If a regulator doesn't have the provision for the sharing of information with leagues or an information sharing hub, integrity monitors such as ourselves, that can leave risks for that regulatory regime in terms of the protection of the consumers from fixed events, as well as gaps in the monitoring of leagues and events that are bet on in that state. And that also then creates residual risk for other operators, leagues, and regulators in jurisdictions not within. And so making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page, everybody will have different regulatory regimes. Being on the same page, having conversations, paying attention to these issues, especially as things evolve and especially as people feel their way through the space, with all of the new regulatory regimes that have come through, is really essential. And it is probably the one thing that always comes to my mind when I try and navigate my way through the different laws and statutory provisions that I read on a daily basis.
Thanks, Sebastian, for that. That's a helpful way for us to start out. And actually, since you ended with that question, we actually have a question addressing that exactly. It's a little later than I was planning to ask it, but I'll ask it now. And that is, how can the collaboration between sports organizations, law enforcement, and the betting industry be improved, to create a more comprehensive approach when we're attacking these integrity challenges? So would love to hear from Leo and David on this topic. Maybe we'll start with Leo.
Yeah, and look, just maybe for some context, I think we've certainly come a long way in that respect over the last 5 years. So like I said, I've been at MLB now for 2.5 years, but I was kind of following the industry even before that. And given like the context of how each state was able to legalize sports betting and how that came about from the Supreme Court case, I think the starting point for this conversation was to be honest, like a little rocky. And I think over the last few years, a lot of the progress I think we've made has just come about from kind of like building the trust between stakeholders like the leagues, like the regulators and like the integrity monitors, so that people understand, at least from the league perspective, that integrity isn't just a talking point hidden behind another like legislative ask for like an integrity fee or something like that. It really is kind of like at the core of what we focus on and what we care about in this space. And look, at least from my experience, I've been pleasantly surprised at how the collaboration has worked so far with other operators in the integrity space. I think where the progress can still happen is sort of in the more kind of proactive, forward-facing kind of like how do we plan prevention measures for the future, instead of like how do we react to something that just popped up and that we have to deal with. So like in that respect, in the reactive, like what do we do now space, I actually think the collaboration has worked well with sportsbooks. But I think there's still a lot of space to improve when it comes to putting measures in place, and kind of like prioritizing those proactive measures and the sportsbooks kind of like product roadmap, and finding ways to get those solutions in place so that we don't have to be kind of like reactive and collaborating to fix an issue that's already popped up. We're trying to prevent something from happening in the first place.
Thanks, Leo. Dave, you have anything to add to that? You're still on mute, Dave. You're still on mute.
Hold on. There we go.
There you are.
I think it was well said by Leo. We have to always remember in sports wagering world, which is predominantly empowered through technology, certainly in our state. And I think most 30 states now have online wagering on sports, that we're really in a nascent stage when it comes to real-time data monitoring, collaboration, information sharing. Because quite honestly, in the gaming world prior to online wagering on sports, technology was not really a key element in bricks and mortar operation as far as innovation and the use of integrity. You know, you're very much in your own silo, in your own state, and worried about what's happening in essentially a series of bricks and mortar casinos. The world order has changed, and the fintech industry is key in the development of all these proactive structures and practices and ideas to assist in integrity. Because we don't have that technological support, we're going to be very, very stressed to ensure that you have interstate or international integrity in play. And if each state or each jurisdiction is in its own independent silo, we're all smart enough to know that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And we're going to run into some significant issues and problems. So great topic today, because in my personal opinion, this isn't sports wagering today is a technology issue. I realize it's done in bricks and mortar operations, but it's a technology industry. The operators are technology companies, and the B2B companies that provide these services, all these different services to enhance integrity, are key to making sure that the B2C operators have all the tools at their disposal that the regulators want them to have, and the leagues want them to have, and the content providers want them to have. And so we're really wide open, I think, moving forward in the future to doing things better than we ever have before. And I think we can be the lead in the United States in this area, more so than other jurisdictions outside of our country. But I hope to work with them. But I think we know what we need to do here, and if we can get it done, others will copy it.
And just as a follow-up to that question, sort of speaking to what everyone has said when talking about that this is a global industry, that this is a technology business, there's clearly been substantial progress made in integrity monitoring, and prevention on the regulated side of the business. What risk does the existence of the unregulated offshore operators introduce into this system? And is that concerning to you? Is that an issue? It's one of the issues that the center likes to highlight, because we're talking about the difference between the regulated and the unregulated industry. Does the presence of the unregulated industry create more problems for integrity monitoring? Let's throw Leo, I'd love to hear from Lee on that. Yeah, your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's a huge blind spot for us. Like when we talk about US integrity and the monitoring that happens, typically I think we're still talking within the confines of the regulated market and kind of within the scope of the information gathering that is capable of happening from regulated operators. But it's for sure something that's concerning from the standpoint that people who are betting on offshore unregulated websites, that information is not available. Like it's not something new that I'm saying. This has been an issue for forever. But when it comes to like preventing people from violating league policies or any sort of enforcement measures like that, even if you put everything in place that you need for a regulated market, there's still the elephant in the room, which is the unregulated market. And if someone is I'm not going to say smart enough, but just kind of like aware of the limits of kind of the enforcement mechanisms that we have currently in place, it's still very easy for them to think that they can get away with it, or that they can operate without any consequences by just using an illegal offshore operator. So it's for sure like a huge issue for us, and I think it's still a big topic because the solution is not easy. Like I don't know what any of us, maybe except for Director Rebuck, can do, and even himself. Like I don't know if like he can write letters to the government, to the federal government, all he wants. I don't know what the solution is, because you can shut one down and maybe another one comes up. It's for sure a tough issue, but I'm curious what others on the panel think.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I think I agree with Leo. It's a definite issue. And to a degree, it might always be a bit of an issue. But that's why, from an integrity monitoring perspective, it's so important for us to leverage all the relationships we have. We oftentimes will see that a dramatic shift in odds or lines in an unregulated market, or an unregulated book rather, can impact, and usually does impact, the lines of regulated operators and regulated books. When we have conversations with our partners like MLB, part of those conversations is to flag suspicious behavior that may indicate that a line change is worth further investigation. And so that's why it's really, like, while we facilitate and we can detect suspicious betting, when it comes to the unregulated market side, it's very important that we're having conversations with our partners to discuss suspicious activity or abnormal activity that could lead into us looking into suspicious line movements with a keener eye, let's say. Simply because you don't see a suspicious bet doesn't mean there hasn't been one. And the reality is that the unregulated market has been and is being used to facilitate transactions that are improper in nature and can facilitate match fixing. And so it's really important that we're having these conversations that can indicate to us that something may be going on in the unregulated market, so that we can trigger and support investigations that can lead to the discovery of potential impropriety in the unregulated market or outside of the scope of the wagering data that we do receive. And that's happened before, I will say. And that's why those conversations are so important.
Thank you, Sebastian. Let's loop in Chris here and talk a little bit about SharpRank and what you guys do. You know, I think when people think of integrity, a lot of what they think about is traditional match fixing, manipulation by participants in the sport that influences the outcome of the contest. SharpRank sort of deals with another aspect of integrity, which is, you know, improper influence from media or influencers over betting. And now we have quite a bit of integration happening between media and sports books. You know, you look at things like FanDuel TV and now ESPN Bet and many others. So can you talk a little bit about that growing integration between media and sports betting, and what the industry can potentially learn from the financial industry about managing those boundaries?
Yeah, that's a senior thesis. I'll do my best to be concise here, but yeah, we sit SharpRank, and what we do and independent evaluators do is we sit on the other side of the fence to the match. So anything that can be affected on the field through a player, ref, coach, whatever the case might be, that's really not what we look at. We look at the interplay between three main groups. One is the trading floor. The other is, which is the people who take the bets, offset the risk. The other is the insider. So up until recently, reporting who was injured, who wasn't coming out after halftime because they were dinged up right before the half. You know, who's getting traded, what the game plan is. That's reporting the news. Now we have a very different landscape. And as you talk about, Seb talked about the 2.0 model of it, right? You're looking at a merging of industries where we've now built the exact same infrastructure that, to Director Rebuck's point, has solutions from the financial markets already in place. The technology already exists, and why they're so effective is because they're private sector and can stretch across state lines. That's really the interplay of it is, you know, broad intent of what those regs need to be, and then the use of private sector companies who can adopt to whatever they're supposed to oversee. The third one is the Sharp population. And I know if you are familiar with the industry, you will say you might have some sort of connotation to what Sharp means or tout means, or whatever the case might be. We define it as anyone who has a financial incentive to drive engagement or audience to a sports book. And just for a quick background on history lesson, because we're in the FinTech sports wagering, I want to merge these two ideas for everybody. And if you've heard this before, you're probably absolutely sick of hearing me talk about it. But prior to 2003, a lot of the companies sitting right behind David in the financial world, in the financial market, had their equity trading, which is where stocks were bought and sold, commingled with their equity research, which was people telling you which stocks to buy and sell. What was happening was the traders were approaching the analysts saying, we just took a huge position on this company. Go give a report out that says this is a buy and here's your way exaggerated price target, and we'll kick you back some money after we get out of the position. Conversely, the researchers were coming to the traders saying, we're about to issue a really bad report on a stock that our parent company is highly exposed on, so trade out of it before we hit publish. That ended really, really badly, and the worst effect of it all was investor confidence, right? And so that to me is really the identical infrastructure here, where you have a sports book, which is a trading floor, commingled with content, which is the people telling you what to bet on or who's injured or whatever the case might be. So this gray area and these blurred lines, we are in no way saying like take the structural reforms of the SEC and say, hey, firewalls, don't talk to these people, they're not allowed to communicate. We're saying somebody needs to make sure that there is no market manipulation happening, there is no fraud occurring. If there are bad actors, they will get checked. And I think that's to tie back to one of your earlier points with illegal books. It's really important to set a speed limit, right? Because without that, everything looks the same, and speeding or whatever the case might be is not enforceable until there are some sort of standards set that everyone knows they need to follow. And so that's really kind of what we do, and we audit that relationship. It's a mix of insider trading software as well as internal communication software, as well as a straight up audit that tests for all the assertions around completeness, existence, accuracy, occurrence, presentation, and valuation, and internal controls. So as that merges, we see stories now almost weekly about the conflicts of interest between those two functions. And now that they're sitting under the same roof in a lot of instances, how do we do something proactively, which is what I think everybody would agree is kind of the solution. But
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That's very helpful. Dave, what, from a regulator's standpoint, you know, when it comes to this kind of conflict of interest stuff that Chris is talking about, and what worries you? What conversations are you having with the operators about this type of thing, with media? How do you see this?
Well, the position that Chris has taken and mentioned is is really an old one in gambling, but very unique because of the power of technology, the internet, the broadcast media, more so than the print media, but also don't forget about the social media. So you have a technological opportunity for people to gamble, highly used by most of the people, certainly in New Jersey. And then what's going to be their resource for information? More than likely the aspects that I mentioned to you. And so when you're dealing with advertisers, marketers, promotions that are offered, content providers who are commenting on options available to the betting public. These are all areas that can be abused, and nobody wants that abuse, because if it did occur to a great degree, the general public lose confidence in essentially the risk or the opportunities or the entertainment value of sports wagering, and they will suffer tremendously. So we all know what, doesn't take an attorney on the call to remember there's a number of issues here involved with freedom of speech, constitutional rights on advertising, and things like that. However, there's also consumer protection laws that you have to balance with what actions are being taken. And our dialogue with the industries who do have a direct interaction with content providers, with the essentially ownership interests, they're taking it very seriously. And I'm very optimistic that they're going to be in a better position than others who don't have a direct interest, but are using the advertising, marketing, and promotion outsiders, and maybe in some cases inside staff. And as a regulator, some of these companies we don't regulate, but certainly we do regulate others that are tied to the operations of a B2C company. And we've had numerous standards put into place to guide them in making sure that they don't overstep the bounds. So it's definitely an area of interest in moving forward. I do believe that most in the industry want to do it the right way, and it's going to take time to work on it. But again, I go back to what I said originally. If you do not take advantage of internal controls and safeguards that are available to you through technology, and you only rely on your personal interactions and your direct supervisory oversight, more than likely you're going to have problems in the future, because the profit motive of some people will be engaged in a way that could be embarrassing to the company. So, yeah, it's an area of concern, and I think it's going to be a continuing area of concern as we continue to see what options are available in marketing product to consumer.
Thanks, Dave. All right,
Can I
just
jump in there for a bit?
yeah, go ahead, Leo.
Because I feel like there have been a couple of recent instances of what people call like league insiders or reporters who have like broken news that turns out to be wrong, and then there's like a perception that they were somehow incentivized to do something based on relationships with gambling companies or something like that. At least from a league perspective, what worries me more would be if, for example, like one of these insiders like received information and like he used that to either like bet on something himself or disclose it to someone privately, as opposed to like tweeting about it and it's ultimately something that's wrong. Like that, just to me, that the cases that have popped up of someone just reporting wrong information seem to be more of like a individual reputational harm issue rather than a sports betting integrity issue. But I understand that there's certainly a perception of maybe something inappropriate happening, and we're certainly aware of that to the extent it impacts anyone who's connected to a league. One point that Chris made that I'm actually curious about. So Chris, I believe you were saying that there could be a case where like a sports book takes large bets or sees like a ton of exposure on one side of a bet, and then they could go to like someone that they use as an influencer and tell them to like promote the other side of the bet. It seems like this book would just move the lines or do something else to like manage the risk there before they try to go to an influencer and say, hey, promote this side of the bet. But tell me if I'm totally off base there, or like if I'm thinking about this the wrong way.
Yeah, I think so. Good point. And just to clear up what we were talking about earlier, that no one's saying reporting wrong news is like against the law or like frowned upon. The problem becomes there is no one saying that information wasn't fed. All that information affects betting markets, all of it. Injuries, trades, whatever the case might be. That there's no way to know that information, the material non-public information, is not passed to manipulate a betting market ahead of hitting tweet, whether it's right or wrong. So that's really kind of what we're talking about, so to speak. And with respect to that, yeah, I mean, and I'll always go back to what's out David's window there, but like with respect to markets, you have two things. You have interest rate and money supply. That's how you affect a market. So with respect to a betting market, you have line movement and dollars. And so the ability to manipulate those two things are really your two levers that you can use. One of them is free market to some extent. Does the public actually drive the line? Who knows? That's outside of my scope. But I think those two levers with respect to a betting market are really what we're trying to say is like no one's, at least at our company, no one's sitting here with like a tinfoil hat on, right? And all we're saying is just trust me is not a business model. It's just not. And so the entire ability to push to a private sector and to point at a third party is highly effective to secure stabilization in the industry, consumer confidence, and outset growth going forward.
Thanks, guys. I just wanted to let the audience know that if you have any questions for the panelists, we're going to make some time at the end to answer any questions you have. If you have those questions, you can put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them as we are able. So let me just let's pivot a little bit and go back to you, Leo, and tell us a little bit about going into this 2024 season. What's MLB doing or going to be doing to ensure the integrity of their competitions as sports betting becomes more prevalent and widespread?
Yeah, and look, it's good that we have a US Integrity here because I'm hoping they have a very uneventful and boring 2024 MLB season. But it really always, and I'm sure it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone, but it really our first and most important line of defense is always going to be education. And today's actually a convenient time to have this webinar because it's like the first game of spring training, and it's also the first day where we're like starting the educational program around sports betting that happens during spring training. So in the next 30 days, we're gonna be in front of every single major league player, every single minor league player, and every single umpire, kind of going through the rules on sports betting. And I know when we talk about innovation, a lot of people's minds tend to go to like technology, but I think there's also a lot of innovation that happens when it comes to like how we approach education. both in terms of just like the content that we cover and kind of like the frequency and the context in which we cover it. So, for example, like we're always going to cover the basic rules of our policy. So, like, don't bet on baseball, which has been drilled into players' minds since they were probably playing Little League. But every year we try to have like different points of emphasis based on like what we see in the industry or what's happened in the recent months. So for example, this year, one of the things we're emphasizing is like the account sharing, and why that's a bad idea, and why betting through others or letting others bet through you, and like why that's prohibited under our policies. Even things like multi-sport parlays that are pre-made and promoted by sports books that might trip people up if they don't look at them closely enough. And even the idea using like recent examples from other leagues that or not just making the lesson don't do this, but also adding kind of context for like if you do this, like chances are you're going to get caught. So just kind of like changing the way we emphasize certain messaging is something that's very real and something that happens within our league a lot. And I mentioned the frequency and the context. So I believe like over the last few years, we've really kind of leaned into the idea that, hey, like once a year during spring training, in person is great, but we don't want to assume that that's enough. So we really kind of have targeted sessions throughout the year for groups of players who may need more reminders. So for example, our minor league players get more targeted training throughout the year. We have trainings that happen during our Arizona Fall League, which minor league players who have a decent shot of like playing the majors are part of. We have targeted trainings for players who are coming out of the Dominican Republic and transitioning to our minor leagues. So it's become just kind of like an evolving approach that still relies on in-person and live training, but where the lessons and the context that we add kind of shifts based on kind of points of emphasis we want to make, or just recent news that we've seen that we think is good to kind of like embed within the rules and like the context of why you should listen to us. So that's on my mind today, is like the education that we're starting today and that I'm going to be a part of myself starting next week. But yeah, education is always going to be first and foremost on our line of defenses, even before we get into all the technological tools that our partners provide us and help us develop. So I'm always gonna focus on the education before anything else.
Just to jump in here, the education piece is probably the most important preventative piece. And it's great to hear it talked about when we talk about innovation. One of the things that US Integrity does, and one of the things that we say to everybody, is that education is the last thing you should take off the menu of services or items that you want to provide. It's so essential. Players need to understand what the policies are, what they're allowed to do and not do. But from a responsible gambling perspective as well, there was a study that came out last year that said that high-level athletes are double as likely to have problem gambling issues. There are studies that suggest it's even more prevalent than that. Athletes do bet if they're allowed to bet, and violations do occur. How are we catching these violations? How are you mitigating these violations? And how are we also supporting these athletes who are, according to the studies at least, far more likely to be susceptible to problem gambling? The Ivan Toney suspension this year, the Sandro Tonali suspension last year, both instances of an individual betting on their own games, both instances of an individual who had a problem gambling issue. When we talk about innovation in the space, it's about education, making sure that people have the right supports, having the right avenues, consistently updating those avenues and the education that you do provide, so that we are providing the best possible service to the athletes that provide us entertainment, provide us access to the sports and things that we love, as well as keeping the market safe and full of integrity. When it comes to how we do that from the tech side, from a preventative perspective, US Integrity is created along with Odds On Compliance, who are about to fully merge with, but we've already announced that merger, ProBet, which is a system where a league and a sports book can essentially check in an anonymized way without any personal information changing hands, whether or not a player has bet in violation of a policy or a regulatory regime's obligations. And having that link in, embracing the fact that we now have a solution to checking prohibited bettors, which a lot of regulatory regimes have a provision for, or even in some cases from a statutory perspective, but previously did not have an automated way to do it, is really how we transition from this 1.0 to 2.0 model.
And
Thank
just
you.
on the responsible gambling piece, so I didn't include that in the integrity pieces that I mentioned, but that's for sure now, and has become in the last few years like a part of our training. So again, the message now in our education, which maybe was different 10 years ago, it's not just like don't do this, don't do that. It acknowledges that our players are allowed to bet on other sports, and it does provide messaging on if you do choose to do that, here's what responsible gambling means, and like here's how it looks, and here's how it doesn't look. So it's for sure become a big part of our education in recent years, at least, and it will continue to be because I do think that part is also critical, that we don't hide from the fact that our players do gamble, are allowed to gamble in other sports, and can do so responsibly.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential, and it's like it feeds into that integrity piece from my perspective, because a player who develops a problem gambling issue, maybe gets himself into a bit of a hole, also has access potentially to some inside information that could dig them out of that hole pretty quickly. And so regardless of the policies that are in place, having the controls and embracing the fact that there are products out there finally that can securely check these things, it's so essential. I say it not from the perspective of being at US Integrity, but from previous experience at the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. The ProBet tool was top of my mind when I was there, because part of my concern as a regulator was that we would facilitate bets or corruption in the sporting events that happened in Ontario or in Canada, and especially where it was near and dear to our hearts. These things can create PR issues, but they're also about like the health and safety of our players and health and safety of the sports betting industry as a whole. There are people who are constantly looking for problems. The problems will happen, and it's about having the right controls and the messaging and the kind of reasoning in place to say that these things have been adequately attended to. These things have been prepared for. We anticipated these issues. We attempted to solve these issues, and we made use of all of the things and all of the tools at our disposal to do so. Leo is a great example of a league that takes integrity and its athlete safety and the integrity of its sport extremely seriously, and addresses it extremely well. And it's always good to hear from him.
Thank you, Sebastian. I want to get to one last question here as we're running out of time. But this goes back to our focus on innovation again. So what role do new technologies, things like advanced analytics, AI, others, play in detecting and preventing match fixing or other forms of manipulation in sports betting, or protecting the integrity of the sport? And what do you see coming in the future around integrity and sports betting? Let's start with you, Sebastian.
I think it's embracing and seeing regulators and leagues mandate those they have partnerships with, or those they have control over, to embrace the technological solutions and innovations that have come through the space, whether it be ProBet, the integration of data into integrity monitors, these things make life easier for everybody, but also make our ability to detect issues and prevent issues far, far greater. When it comes to Probet, we've had great buy-in, and it's awesome to see everybody get on board and push towards the same kind of solution that I think we all want to see. The prohibited better thing will always, or issues will always kind of immediately hit the news. You see it with whatever suspension comes through regarding it. And it's really, really important that regulators and leagues and everybody who has a say in the space embraces those solutions as much as they can. I know, speaking from my time as a regulator, there are certain things and certain ways that a regulator works that maybe doesn't mandate a product, but certainly mandates a control. And mandating that control in a way that ensures the most efficient and effective solution for the integrity of the game is extremely important. We'll continue to see innovation in the space as technology evolves, but for technology to evolve and for things to get even better than they are, because they are pretty good right now, I will say, with the proliferation of all the regulatory regimes and the buy-in of all the leagues and all the operators. It will really depend on how much buy-in there is to the existing solutions, because that will then thrust forward other players, including ourselves, to continue to develop or innovate upon solutions we have or create new ones. And so what Chris is talking about with potential insider information or the illicit sort of movement of lines or handle, that's extremely important. We can take lessons from other industries, and I speak to that from the perspective of having previously worked in financial crime overseas. These things are extremely similar. We will see overlap, and we should try and look forward by looking backward at the issues that other industries and other spaces have seen, because there will be overlap, and there is considerable attention to be paid to those things.
So, Dave, as a regulator, commenting on this, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we have implemented in the United States that in the gambling world, particularly in the casino gambling world, that have expanded significantly with sports wagering, online sports wagering, online gambling. And first of all, the general concept of privilege. If you're going to be an operator in this industry, it's not right. And you have a privilege that is controlled by the state or the government. And in order to engage in this operation as a gambling company, you're probably more regulated than any other industry in the United States. Okay? We know more about you and your family and your affairs than you even know about yourself at sometimes. But then you expand that now because of the online nature and the wagerer, the person, the individual, the consumer. It's a privilege too. And in order to engage in that privilege, you're going to give up significant information about yourself. And we're going to know you can't be anonymous. You cannot be anonymous. In the old days, you'd go and place your bet with your local bookie in some bar or behind some closed doors, and nobody would ever know who you are, who that bookie was. In today's world, in order to create an account to gambling on a regulated market, we probably know more about you than your bank does. We know about where your money's coming from. We know if you have money, because it's all digital. And we know more about, in order to get an account, the information you're asked to give is extremely private information that then will be evaluated, monitored, and we will watch you in everything you do, in every wager you place. And we have the technology, because of the FinTech community, to know everything that you do, and we save it forever. It's not cameras, it's a record. And the public nature of then gambling. What you have before you is not hidden. in a regulated market. It's all public. The wagers, the lines, how it's moving, it's all public. And what Chris was talking about, yes, could it be influenced by outsiders or insiders? Absolutely. But generally, their presentation, if they're in a content provider, is also public. Social media, the internet, the broadcast media. So as you add all this information together, it's overwhelming to monitor and track without further technological improvements, without further technology to take risk analysis, and then understand that are you really going to watch real closely the guy or gal who lost $50 in one bet on the Super Bowl and probably never has bet again? No, but you're definitely going to be focused on others who are very actively engaged, and particularly from a responsible gambling perspective and an anti-money laundering perspective, to those who are the quote VIPs, high rollers, sharps, whatever you want to call them, because their model may becomes a business to them, as opposed to just the individual I talked about earlier, who is really in the mass market, is truly spending money as entertainment, as opposed to somebody who wants to engage in this in a more detailed, comprehensive, and collaborative way. So, yeah, we have a long way to go here, guys. But the infrastructure in the United States is much different than foreign countries. And there are privacy laws in those foreign countries that do not allow them to get the information we have on everybody engaged in gambling here. Now, will data privacy laws, when they're implemented in states, we have a bill going through here in New Jersey. There's already data privacy laws in other states. We're well aware of them, California, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What would be the impact on those privacy laws on this area? I don't know yet, but it's something we got to focus on, because the power of the technology to allow us to monitor and share information amongst all the users is immense. And everybody asks, well, what about the regulator? In my mind, the regulator is nothing more than the conductor of the orchestra. We need help from the leagues, teams, advertising companies, FinTech community, to pull this together in a way that we can all be very proud of, and have a sense that the risks that we're facing are reduced and continue to be reduced. Risks are always going to be there. They're always going to be there. Human nature is such that people are going to try to find an advantage, take advantage of it for their benefit. But if we don't have these benefits from the FinTech community and their innovation and their ideas, and follow up on them and implement them and require them, we're going to be in bigger trouble. And those risks are going to be higher than any of us want to have in anything we do, all the operators and all the players and all the teams. So we're in a good position, Dave, but we got a lot of work still to do. That's my final statement.
Thanks, Dave. We do have a couple questions and only a couple minutes left, so I want to try and get at least one of them. The one question here is about sports governing bodies and their role in preventing, mitigating, or taking action for integrity. The question is, what would be your thoughts about innovative approaches that we all together, and that means everyone in the ecosystem, can take for getting these sport governing bodies to improve safeguards against integrity risks?
Wow, big question. But given we have a minute, I'll just say, like, from my perspective, at least as a league, like, we're doing like, we take this incredibly seriously, and obviously, like, in terms of education, doing everything we can to mitigate those risks. I'll just say, any type of big picture solution out there, like, I have never, like, turned down a pitch when it comes to, like, an integrity solution that could potentially help us. And I think everyone, and again, it might be a like product roadmap thing, or like a just down the road when people have the bandwidth and the capacity, and when they've launched in all the states that they've launched in, like when they're ready to like dive deep on integrity solutions. But I am open and ready to try to find those in any way that could help us, for sure.
Yeah, just to hammer that home and just to tie it all the way back to what Seb was saying at the beginning, I think bandwidth and willingness to adopt proactive solutions is a function of uniformity in standards and intent of those standards. So like as that becomes more the norm, there's more free time, bandwidth, attention paid to solutions that can be plugged in that previously, to Leo's point, needed to be shot down 18 months because it's like, what do you want us to do? Like we, and so that to me is, I think, just to echo it back to the beginning, like that is really, really, really important for us to take a run at. And you know, I think Director Reebok's right, like that we are viewed not just in FinTech, but now in sports betting as the world leader for compliance, right? Like those types of things do travel well. And I think if we find a model that works and we can expand it out, I think there's willing participants everywhere looking for solutions. It's not just each state. So we're trying, we're working on it.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. We've come to the end of our hour. I'd like to thank our panelists for their insight and their contributions today, which have all been magnificent. We certainly could drill down on any one of these topics and have our own call on each one. So maybe we'll do that at a later date. But thank you all for attending. I want to take this time to announce that the last two panels in our Gamble4Good series are coming up in March and April of this year. In March, we'll have a panel on innovation and DEI, and April 10th, we'll have a panel on innovation in ESG. You can register for both of those panels on our website, ftswinnovation.org/events. I hope you can join us for that. You will get a copy of the recording of this event, and if anyone you know wasn't able to register for the event yet, we're going to put this up on our website and have it available for download there as well. So I'll send that out and publish that shortly after the meeting. But that's it. We're done for today. Thank you again, everyone. And we hope to see you again soon.